don't start. Just kidding. We've been up, baby. The Reef Bro way. Today is episode 3 of the tutorials, and I will be showing you every test I run on my reef kit. And yeah, it takes a while, but you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. Starting with, we got the hardness, calcium, magnesium, phosphates, salinity, TDS for the RODI water, nitrates. I gotta get a new one of these because API sucks, but until then, we stick with it because it works the Reef Bro way. The first test I like to run before anything is just the TDS test. So I got this on Amazon. It measures any dissolved solids in the water, and this starts with my RODI system that I have upstairs, set up really weirdly in my slop sink, but you know, gets the job done, filters the water, and essentially what it does is it takes out every mineral, anything that's dissolved, chlorine, calcium, magnesium, all the good stuff, bad stuff, gone. So the water is just purely H2O molecules. And essentially what I'll do is, let's say this was filled up with RODI water that I had, I'll take my TDS meter, place it in, and then it'll give you a value. So right now it says 0 ppm because there's no water. But what I'll do is to check my RODI water every time I use it, because when the filters start to get old or too much water has run through them, you'll creep up. So we'll go to 2, 4. I actually just replaced it because my TDS was at 10, which we do not want in the tank. So now it's back down to 0 and we're good to go. The second test I like to run is to check the salinity, and to do that, I use my refractometer. $20 on Amazon, not the best tool in the world, but it does get the job done. And essentially what you do is you take 2 drops from the tank, 1, 2, you put it on the glass panel, and then you close the lid. And one important thing that not a lot of people do is you actually have to wait 30 seconds. So just enough time to get a rep in. So now what I'll do is I'll look into the light, and what's going to happen is based on how many, I think it's off solids, it will refract the light and it'll give you a nice line. So from here, I can tell it's about 1.026, which is constant. So thankfully my auto top off is working well, and now I know my salinity is in check to start the rest of the test. The third test I like to run in my day is the phosphate checker by Hannah. It's a ultra low phosphate checker, and it comes in a convenient digital reader like this, and it gives you 2 of these capsules, which you fill up to 10 milliliters, and there's a line, so it's pretty foolproof of what you're actually going to do. And so this is 10 milliliters of tank water. I take it, I turn it on, and it will say add C1. So when it says this, I'm going to take my 10 milliliters of tank water, plop it in, close the lid, press the button, and you'll get a line where it says add C2. And what this is I have to add the reagent in. And they all come in these blister packs, which is kind of the nice part about Hannah checkers, because this kit itself costs about $50, but after you have the apparatus, these test kits are $9 for 25. So not terrible. It comes out to a little more than like a quarter a test, which really isn't too bad. And I watched a video actually on the best way to add these, because you don't want to spill any of the reagent. And for anyone wondering what phosphates are, phosphate as a molecule is PO4, and it comes from food breaking down, fish poop, and everything like that. One sec, I gotta focus. Like I said, I don't want to spill this. All right, perfect. So now I'm gonna mix it for 2 minutes while I talk. Wait 1 second. It's time to get my rep in. Little sore. Back to what I was saying. You're gonna mix this for 2 minutes while the reagent tries to get all in the water. So it's just gonna invert back and forth, and I use this cloth to make sure there's no fingerprints. But again, phosphates are kind of like a balancing act. If you have 0, we'll go way back when I had my dinos and they killed everything in my tank. So you don't want it to bottom out. Likewise though, you don't want it to go skyrocket, because then you'll have a ton of algae growth and your tank will look like garbage. So you really want to try to find that sweet spot. I like 0.02. I found that to be the best point from my tank because corals use it to grow and my Cato uses it to grow. So again, it's finding that sweet spot in the middle that really has your tank at a healthy balance. Now after the 2 minutes has been up, I'm going to press and hold the button for 3 minutes. A timer will come on because again, it needs time for that reagent to react. And while this is running, normally I'll run another test in between because that's why I have those 3 minutes. But I'm going to show you a little more in depth of how to cut these reagents. And apparently they are in these little blister packs. Well, not blister packs, but whatever these packs are, just because that's how like real scientists do it, which I guess I'm not a real scientist. I'm a fake reef scientist. I don't know. Some garbage they make up, but let me show you. I'll come up to the camera. So you have the square, right? I like to first flick it and get all the powder to the bottom. So the powder is focused right where my indent figure is. I'll fold it in half. So then and flick it again, so then it's all concentrated here. So then when I cut it right here, which I'll show you on this pack, because I'm not gonna, a quarter's a quarter, man. When you cut it here, you have it like this, right? You can open it up and then fold it again. Oh, this one's not gonna work, of course. But when you fold it like this, you have pretty much a nice canal. And this canal is what everything can flow through. Tap, tap, tap. And then you get almost all of the reagent every time into the test. Now we have to wait the rest of the 3 minutes, so you can't only show love to the right. The 3 minutes are up, and now I have my reading. I'll look at it and I'll see it is 0.00. Not the best, but since I caught it early because I test, I know I'm gonna have to feed a little bit more and dose more phytoplankton to try to get that phosphates up a little bit. The next test I'm gonna be running is the alkalinity test. I like to run my alkalinity at around 8. Natural seawater ranges from about 7.5 to 8.5, so I like to have it right in the middle. Some people, like SPS reefers, will keep it higher, between 10 to 12, but in the mixed reef, I found 8 works pretty well for me. What alkalinity is for the water's ability to resist changes in pH. And what it also does is it helps make that calcium carbonate shell that you see in the SPS and LPS on the base and SPS primarily. So that's why SPS reefers like to keep it really high. And it works in hand with the calcium, magnesium, and pH. And in order to do this test, it's a titration-based test, which means you add one reagent, then you titrate with the other until you see a color change. And the instructions on it are, I first start with 4 mLs of tank water. So I put those into the tube, and I add 4 drops of this reagent, and it says to invert a couple times before adding the drops. So that's to get anything that's settled in this dropper while I haven't used the test, to get it mixed up back into solution. And now I'll add 4 drops. And that's 4. And then I'll mix this for 5 seconds, and that's just to make sure that this solution is all homogeneous within the water. Let me get the water from the sides. Okay, perfect. So now I have this blue solution, and it's going to turn pink when I meet my level. So I have my syringe, which I'm going to measure out 1 ml of this solution. It's the second part, it's just called KH. I measured out the 1 ml, and there's going to be a little air pocket. That's okay because it accounts for the air in the syringe nozzle. So now what I do is I slowly add into the other solution, and I'll shake it. And you do this until the color changes, and that color change will give you a number on this other syringe. And then you read this off the chart they have, and you can measure your alkalinity. I like to use these tests because, one, everyone online always says use a sulfur because it gives really accurate readings. And now I'm just going to slowly titrate My end goal is I want to get, you know, in labs I have the shaker plates. I think that would be more beneficial than me just sitting here like going back and forth. But for now, we do it the ReefBro way. And I normally add a couple drops at a time until I start to get around the alkalinity that I think. Okay. Because that's when you want to go drop by drop. It makes a big difference. All right, it's getting close. Another way you can tell is by how fast the color changes. So right now I'm at 0.6. Okay. Oh, it's getting really close. So for example, right now I'm at 5.5, which corresponds to an alkalinity of about 7. So we're getting close to 8. I'm gonna go 1 drop at a time. All right, the color change occurred right here at 5.1. And I'm gonna have 1 more drop just to make sure that it was, in fact, the color change. And where it was actually a little bit closer to 5. So it corresponds to an alkalinity of about 7.7, 7.8 based on the reading of this chart, which my alkalinity is a little low. I'm looking into dosing. You can make a solution of baking soda and RODI water and slowly add that. BRS has a calculation for it, but right now I'm gonna leave it as is and just keep testing it every day to make sure it doesn't drop below that 7 mark. The next test I'm going to be running is to measure the calcium level. I like to run my calcium around 450 parts per million. The natural seawater is about 400, and anything above 400 is really pretty solid to run it at. You just don't really want huge swings. And this is, again, just like the other one, a titration-based test. So I first take 2 mLs of my my seawater, not natural, I wish. And then instead of adding a solution, it comes with a powder, just Ca1 powder. So I add 1 scoopful of this. And while I do that, I'll kind of explain. Calcium is one of the most important elements in the tank because, for one, that's what the corals build their shell off of for the LPS. And pretty much the whole coral is calcium in SPS. But it's also important for my invertebrates because my conch, my turbo snail, they all take calcium out of the water to build their calcium carbonate shell. So very important element that you want to keep in high levels because if it's low, then they won't be able to build that shell and they might die. But so for now, I added this 1 scoop of Ca1, and then it says don't mix, but instead you take, again, 1 ml of the Ca2 solution, and then I add 0.6, and then you mix everything. I'm not sure why this is what it is, but that's just the instructions. And I didn't write the test, so I'm gonna follow as they say. So I get 1 ml, and I add until 0.4. Okay. And now I mix for 5 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this test is actually backwards of the alkalinity because alkalinity you start with blue and you go to pink. This one you start with pink and go to blue. So it must be something with the reagents. But now I'm just going to do the same exact method of titration. Add a couple drops. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I mix. And same thing, I'm looking for that color change from pink to blue. And then I'll measure my level off of the syringe. My calcium levels have stayed pretty consistent and they get replaced by water changes. Some people like alkalinity, they'll dose calcium, but at this point in my tank, I don't think I have to start dosing. Once my corals get a little bigger and start to suck up more calcium, I'll probably have to start, but for now, we're okay. Again, just adding slowly. And this level in your tank directly depends on how much salt mix you use for me, because The more salt and the higher salinity, the more concentrated the calcium, magnesium, everything else will be. Okay, so we have the color change, and now I look at the syringe, and it's at about 0.4, which when I look at here, it corresponds to 480, which is a little bit higher than I normally run my calcium at. However, because my salinity was a little bit higher than it normally is, it makes sense, and overall a pretty solid calcium level. I'm happy with that, I don't have to change anything. Here I'm going to be testing magnesium, and I use Aquaforce magnesium test just because BRS did a video and it was found that this is the best test, and it was about the same price as all the other ones. And this is probably the most complicated test just because it has the most reagents. And you start, again, another titration where I add 2 mLs of water into the container. And then I first add reagent A. They make it pretty easy because it goes A, B, C, D, so it's easy to follow. And I'm gonna add 5 drops. And it's important to measure calcium first because you add the amount of drops of part A based on your calcium levels. So I'm gonna shake it and add the 5 drops. And magnesium in a reef tank is important because if its levels are too low, your calcium and alkalinity will start to precipitate out, and you'll get a calcium carbonate little precipitations, and you'll see it on like your return pump or your wave maker, and you don't want that to precipitate out. You want it to stay in the water so then your corals, your fish, well, not your fish, your inverts can absorb it. So I add that 5 drops of reagents, and now I'm going to add 3 drops of reagent B and mix for approximately 5 seconds. So this is reagent B. Again, you want to just invert a couple times to make sure nothing's on the bottom. And then 3 drops. 1, 2, 3. And now I stir for 5 seconds. So give it the nice flick of the wrist. Stir. And following that, I add 1 scoop of C. So like I said before, A, B, C. They really make it idiot proof, which is good because I'm an idiot. So you need to follow the instructions as clearly as possible. So 1 scoop of reagent C in. And I'm going to gently mix the contents of this vial just to make sure everything is all together. And this is where you're going to get the color. So it starts at pink and then you're going to change it to blue, so very similar to the calcium test. Mix it. I like to mix it for a little bit longer than 5 seconds, maybe like 10 to 15, to make sure all the reagents are in a good mixture. And again, it's just like all the other tests. Now I measure out 1 ml of reagent D and you do the titration. Again, I'm just slowly adding drops and swirling in between because that is how you measure. Okay, so it's starting to become purplish, which means it's probably going to switch to blue in the next drop or 2. So at this point, when it gets that nice dark color, I'll go drop by drop until I hit blue. Okay, so now we have the color change, and I'll look at where the syringe is, and it's about 1.13, and I'll look at this, and it corresponds to magnesium levels of 1310, which is good because you want to run your reef tank between 1200 to about 1440 magnesium. So my magnesium's at a good level, and we're good to go from there.